Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I am your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby, publisher of the site, and Ross Binder, managing editor. Today, before we get started, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment here on YouTube. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Helps us out a lot. So, Hawkeye is set to take on Wisconsin this weekend in Kinnick Stadium. Back-to-back home games for the first time since the beginning of the season. So I guess there's a positive for Iowa coming off that 40-14 victory over Northwestern. And I mean, well, in ways, lots of positives right now coming off that victory and having a new starting quarterback. Brendan Sullivan remains the guy. Depth chart released on Monday, and that made people kind of go crazy. I mean, well, including ourselves. We were a little surprised to not see Cade McNamara there with
Yeah, I was going to
with
say, it's us. We're people.
right with now what we know to be a concussion, though that was kind of the speculation post game. So I guess your guys' thoughts, Ross. I'll go to you here first. When you saw Sullivan on the depth chart, no Cade, and now where we're at with Sullivan being the full go-to guy heading into this week against Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, I think after Saturday, everyone wanted to see Sullivan at number one, so that part was certainly not a surprise. But the lack of Cade on the depth chart was a surprise. Although I think, when it happened on Monday, my first thought was, okay, this must be related to, an injury thing maybe because he didn't come, they didn't see him the rest of the day on Saturday. There was some speculation about a hard hit he took on a sack in that game. And so it seemed like that was the case. And then, of course, Kirk Ferentz confirmed that yesterday in his press conference. So we know, that's why he's not on the depth chart. Does make a very thin quarterback depth chart going into this Wisconsin game. It's Brendan Sullivan and presumably Marco Linez is the backup. But it's wrap Brendan and Sullivan or Brendan Sullivan in bubble wrap for the next 3 days, 4 days. Get him to Saturday and hope he can go the full 60 in that one for sure. Because the options after him are not what Iowa fans want to see at this point. I would say. Adam, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, you bring up the sort of health situation, and even at the press conference, Kirk Ferentz said, "Yeah, we've basically got three healthy QBs. I know who my QB4 is, and I hope you never find out." And all he would say is that it was someone who had played high school quarterback, and that is
That
just
that I would say that doesn't narrow it down because Iowa loves to recruit high school quarterbacks. So
yeah. All it does is narrow out like most of the linemen and the two Aussie punters. Like that's it. Like, and I say most of the linemen because what it doesn't exclude is Luke Elkin, the long snapper, and by all accounts the captain of the special teams room these days. I say that mostly in jest, but Elkin is a guy that they trust, and it would be absolutely hilarious and kind of on point for Iowa to trot out a long snapper at emergency QB. Like would you put it past any of them at this point? I don't actually think Luke Elkin is QB4 for the record, but yeah, Iowa does at the very least need to get Cade McNamara back healthy and ready to play again soon because, as has been mentioned, past Brendan Sullivan on the QB depth chart, there is not a lot of trust baked into what's available there at all. Say what you will about Cade McNamara and his ineffectiveness, but certainly you want him more than you want, say, Jackson Stratton on the field at this point in their careers, in their respective careers. So it was interesting to see that, and it was interesting. It certainly explains why McNamara hasn't been available. Obviously you have to be able to you have to take somebody at their word when they say it's concussion protocol. Kid's not in class. He's having trouble with sort of the basics that go along with the protocol and recovery from concussion. And it's no joke. It's also this has a negative connotation. It's also convenient because with the way that Sullivan has, sort of stepped up into this QB1 role, you don't have to hurry McNamara back from a traumatic brain injury. You don't have to hurry him back on the field because your QB position is in dire straits, right? You don't have to make risky decisions with this concussion. And so, as you take your time getting McNamara back on the field, well, there's also 5 games left in the regular season. And then it's soon to be 4, soon to be 3. And it's at the point where you just sort of have the runway set for Brendan Sullivan for the rest of the season at this point. So obviously, yeah, McNamara getting healthy, the sooner the better, for all parties involved, certainly. But it really does seem like it is all set up for this to be Brendan Sullivan's team for the rest of the season.
So on that note, I just find it really interesting to try to gauge Kirk on this whole topic and Brendan being the starter. He still seems tentative. He is very much a Cade McNamara guy, despite his play so far this season. I don't know what, like, as far as the concussion protocol, right? Of course, best wishes to Cade, want him to be healthy, all of that before I even delve into further talking about it. I don't know what the return like window is like. It varies with concussions, right? Like the
Yeah.
severity
Yeah.
of it. Okay.
Yeah, and Kirk even mentioned that it's sort of a player by player sort of situation, but they're hoping to get him in practice next week was the way that he phrased it.
Okay. So with that in mind, I'm assuming, I don't know if assuming is the right word, but I guess I'm curious as to if we do see Cade again based on that window of return, right? That window that he would hope to come back. Of course, Iowa's got another bye week going forward, so that's important to note. And how much Kirk wants to see him on the field again. And of course, I'm assuming that's also contingent on how Brendan Sullivan plays the rest of the
Yeah,
season too. So this is
yeah,
just as much as folks want to be excited about the change at quarterback, it's still a question mark. And Ross, you got to it. The quarterback situation behind Sullivan is just kind of, we saw Marco Linez in the bowl game, but and Kirk, for whatever reason, at the beginning of the season, more so than now, liked to lump Linez into the group of Sullivan and McNamara, even though we all knew he's not there yet. Redshirt freshman, a Brian Ferentz guy, and so he's there. He's there, and we know he's an athlete. We know he's quick, but we also presume that he's not the thrower of the football that Brendan Sullivan and Cade McNamara are, considering he was 2 of 7. And we've got some intel, and he's in year 2. And what does Kirk always say? By year 3, you're expecting these guys to come along and start to figure it out, and he's not there yet, right? So that should give people pause. And thirdly, Jackson Stratton, walk on from Colorado State. Like, he actually didn't look bad in the Kids Day scrimmage, but he's playing against the threes, right? So you're in a situation where, well, now what I will say is I trust Tim Lester a hell of a lot more than I trust Brian Ferentz than I would in this situation, because we were in this situation. Iowa was in this situation last year with Deacon Hill. And I'd like to think that Tim Lester would have adjusted and done something with Joey Labus's mobility, or maybe throw Caleb Johnson at Wildcat quarterback, right? Or Cooper DeJean or something crazy. Tim Lester would have adjusted. And I think he would and will adjust if this scenario presents itself going forward. Of course, like Kirk said, he hopes that we never find out who that fourth string quarterback is. Zach Lutmer played practice squad quarterback during bowl prep, so there's another one. Did you mention Quinn Schulte, Sebastian Castro? You said Luke Elkin. Like, it's just more, all of them. Yeah. So, and I'm sure I'm missing a ton in there too, but
Well, all those do everything linebackers, right? Like Weisskopf and
yep.
did Reese
Preston,
play
yep, Preston Reese
Preston?
did too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. those are recruiting analyst previously. I should know that, but lots of options there. I'm gonna assume it's Lutmer actually, given that they had him as practice squad quarterback. But again, could be totally wrong. Maybe they'd rather throw out the veteran Quinn Schulte or Sebastian Castro. Who knows? But to revert back to what I was talking about, that depth is a question mark. And like you said, Ross, wrap Brendan Sullivan in bubble wrap this week. And I imagine they're not going to send him running down the field for John to block for Johnny Pascuzzi again this coming week. They're going to say, "We love the fire, don't fricking do it." So that's my expectations. And secondarily, I think what we have to talk about is the level of excitement that Sullivan brings and has brought to the fan base. I mean, all you have to do is spend 5 minutes on Twitter on Iowa Twitter and see how excited people are. I think Sullivan, what you don't get with Sullivan is the arm strength, the arm talent, right? He does have kind of a unique throwing motion as well, so that's something to note. He did throw the ball downfield against Maryland last year, and that was kind of the only time we saw that. But again, that mobility is just going to open things up for Caleb Johnson. And if he's able to throw the ball and make the throws that he needs, it's make the makeables, right? Control the controllables. That's something that he said. And as long as he's able to do that, it's going to make things a lot easier on the Iowa offense. I mean, we've seen it already. We saw it on Saturday.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead, Russ.
I was gonna say I do kind of wonder how much the next 10 days or so are kind of an extended tryout for Sullivan to keep this job for the rest of the season. Because there's the Wisconsin game on Saturday, and then Iowa has a short week turnaround to play at UCLA on Friday. And, TBD where Cade's recovery is at, but it seems like a big ask for him to come back and be, able to come back and play on the road on a Friday night. Like,
That's a lot of travel
yeah,
and like if he's still dealing with that, would you
yeah.
even want him to go?
Yeah, impossible to say. It's just gonna be totally up to his recovery and what that looks like. I saw you had something in a minute, Adam. I was just gonna add that. So yeah, I think depending on how, if Sullivan does great in those games, I think he really locks down the position even after the bye week. If he struggles and Iowa's offense struggles, and I think it's definitely an open question after the bye week for Maryland and then Nebraska to close out the season.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was going to say something pretty similar, which is, it's one thing to be productive against Northwestern's defense. It's going to be another thing to be productive against Wisconsin's defense. And I think that is going to determine a whole lot about how much leash that Brendan Sullivan gets as Iowa's, sort of QB1 while McNamara is still recovering from the concussion. And yeah, the short turnaround on top of the fact that McNamara will not have been practicing this week. And, the practice time is always such a big determinant, or usually it's a pretty big determinant with quarterbacks. What, obviously they've had to sort of adjust the rules a little bit for McNamara and Sullivan with recovery from injury. But here we go again with that. So it'll be very interesting to see whether Sullivan's productivity against a Wisconsin defense, and then with a short, as you mentioned, a short window to prepare for UCLA, and then to go out there. If he can manage all that, if he can, keep Iowa playing winning football, that's obviously going to, sort of bring him a lot further along to permanent QB1 status. And yeah, you mentioned his, throwing mechanics, and it's a little bit like it's almost like he's throwing darts, right? Like it's there's a short arm to it. It's not quite Deacon Hill, launching medicine balls here and there, but the mechanics are unorthodox to say the least. But as long as it's effective, then whatever works works. What I'm going to be curious to see is whether Iowa still has him throwing 3/4 of his passes within 10 yards, which is how McNamara had it, or if this is time to start throwing the ball, more than 10 yards downfield with any amount of regularity whatsoever, because you're going to want to do it against a team like Wisconsin, because the easier you make it for a defense like Wisconsin, and we're talking about one of the top 10 defenses in the nation in terms of, or excuse me, the number 12 defense in the nation in terms of getting third down stops, you know, the easier you make it for a defense that good, the more they get those stops, the more they get you off the field, the more they out complementary football you. So that is going to be one of the keys to the game and will go a long way in determining how secure Brendan Sullivan is at QB1.
I would encourage folks to maybe go back and don't get yourself too hyped up. Maybe don't watch highlights, but go back and watch Sullivan throw the ball and maybe rewatch the game from this last Saturday. It's interesting. It's just a little added nugget, right? It's just and so yes, go check that out. But ultimately, like we've all alluded to, this is kind of the litmus test for Sullivan going forward. What does this look like? And that's another good point, Adam, when you mentioned 3/4 of his throws being within 10 yards. Do they trust him enough to throw the ball past the sticks, so to speak? Is this effectively like what we saw a lot more of once Sullivan came in was the RPO action, right? And what is unfortunate here, and I'm sure folks weren't expecting a Caleb Brown reference in this episode, but to look at guys that you want to get the ball to make plays in space, that's all we said about Caleb Brown, right? This RPO action, man, it'd be really nice to have a guy that you trust to make plays in space like that, right? And I'm not saying that the roster is void of other guys doing that. Maybe, well, Caden Weegen's one. I mean, we just saw it last week with that punt return. He's one that you'd trust. It looks like they tried to get Seth Anderson going in that end around. And he's got a little bit more speed. Jacob Gill is kind of twitchy. So there are options there. Reese Vanderzee's a no-go this week, by the way. We haven't mentioned that. Addison Ostrenga remains out. But, maybe this is a situation, too, where Luke Lachey starts to get more involved. And we've, the fan base has kind of been clamoring to get him, because, like, whether the production's there or not, he's still an NFL tight end, guys. Like, I think we're all on the same page there. Whether or not he goes top 3 rounds is up for debate because of that lack of production, but he's still an NFL tight end. And so to get the tight ends involved, him, Zach Ortworth, obviously Pascuzzi got involved last week, to make that change would be a positive too. And I'm sure Sullivan wants to hit Jacob Gill for a big pass too, now that they're both wearing black and gold. And what else I wanted to mention is something we talked about after the game on Sunday was how Sullivan's former teammates surrounded him and were excited for him. And we've seen that with the guys on the roster too. And in the article I wrote, which you can check out at iowa.rivals.com, it'll be in the description. You can check it out there too. Is that he's just got a fire that I don't know if it's unmatched in the QB room, but it's something that his teammates love, and he brings to the table in practice every day. And to see him talk a little bit of shit, like Logan Jones said, I love it. I hope he keeps doing it. And that's just things that gets the offensive line hyped up, and that's something you need against a team like Wisconsin, who's traditionally pretty solid up front.
Yeah, he's I think the clinical term is he's got that dog in him, and Eliot, you even mentioned, and I think we even mentioned on the last podcast, you asked, I want to see if Brendan Sullivan has that killer in him. I would say promises kept on that one. And the fact that the teammates talk about it, the fact that he doesn't shy away from it, after the game, he'll say, yeah, it is all about respect. And, this is just sort of part of competing for me. And clearly the fact that his former teammates, former coaches, I didn't even notice while I was filming it after that Northwestern game, David Braun was one of the guys that came up and congratulated him after the game. I can recognize Pat Fitzgerald, but David Braun, the eyes don't register quite as easily with that. But what that tells you is teammates have always appreciated that about him. Coaches have always appreciated that it's about the competition with him, but it's not personal. It's not it stays between the lines. And the fact that he commands that sort of respect and has been commanding that sort of respect since he was in Evanston really speaks highly of his innate leadership capabilities. And for a program that takes those so seriously and sort of builds its culture around that leadership, around its bell cows, it really looks like Sullivan wants to be that guy and has been trying to be that guy since he showed up on campus and was the first one in, last one out of the facilities every day, right? He takes this role seriously, and embodies it both in the process and on the practice field. And so far, with one game, has embodied it on Saturdays too. So uh, I don't, Eliot, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I've heard a teammate say one even hedge a sort of compliment for the way that Sullivan goes about things. Like it's been pretty well unequivocal, effusive. Like, I really like what this guy's doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe you could lay that at the feet of Iowa's culture too, just by the way they
Sure.
operate. But from everything that I have heard, read, and seen about Brendan Sullivan, the way he operates with his teammates, talking to people behind the scenes, it's just like this is who he is every day. And that's really good to have that level of consistency from your backup quarterback and buy-in from his teammates. That's I think that's pretty rare. And you get that with a guy who started before, who knows what it means to be a quarterback at the D1 level. So that's really important. Before we get into keys, and I want to do that here relatively quickly because we know Ross only has so much time, Mr. Big Boy with another big full-time job.
With his hair combed.
uh, James Resar flipping positions. 2024 quarterback, the freshman on the roster, has now flipped to wide receiver. Premium subscribers knew that was a possibility. That was something that we've talked about for a while. You look at his film and you see an athlete, and that's definitely not a negative thing. He's a guy that was far and away the best athlete on the team he was on in Jacksonville, Florida at Bishop Kenny. He's 6'4", 212. So he's a big bodied guy. Hasn't done, I mean, he hasn't competed, right? Like obviously he was a fourth string quarterback going into the season, if not fifth string behind Jackson Stratton. And that's where he should have been, just coming in and making that transition. But Ross, we were alluding to the fact, well, also he's hurt. It is a non-contact thing. They didn't elaborate as to what it was, so that's important. But he wasn't going to play this year anyway. Regarding the position change, Ross, when you heard that, and again, you were privy to that information that I thought that was a possible change. Given that he's 6'4", 212, I was like, maybe he's going to play tight end. Like, so I guess what were your thoughts when Kirk came out and told us that yesterday?
Not surprised, honestly. We've seen it with a lot of backup quarterbacks in the past. This in particular right now, I mean, let's be honest, Resar's not a Lester guy. Lester didn't really recruit him, bring him in, evaluate him. I think he's probably much higher on Jimmy Sullivan. I was incoming quarterback and some other guys than Resar. So, this is not a move that surprises me. I think with his athletic tools, there's a better chance for him to make that quarterback to wide receiver or quarterback to tight end switch, I think, successful. We've seen it in the past, and the guys make the move, but they don't really get on the field very much sometimes. I think, if he can pick up the route running, pick up the blocking, he's got a definite shot, I would say.
Yeah, the size makes him especially intriguing because usually when you see QBs make that move to wide receiver, well, okay, they're 6'0", they're 6'1", right? Like they don't have the frame for it. But the last Iowa QB turned wide receiver who had that kind of size and track speed to go with it, a little fella from the St. Louis area named Marvin McNutt, and that worked out fantastically for him. And for a good long while, he was the last Iowa wide receiver picked in the NFL draft. So there is an absolute path, not only in college football, but the way that Kirk Ferentz has run his program, there's absolutely a path for Resar to become a very productive wide receiver in this system. And to have his kind of size on top of somebody like Reese Vanderzee means Iowa can force a lot of mismatches with the smaller defensive backs, sort of try to, you know, place guys strategically. And again, that's a sort of a situation where you trust Tim Lester to generate those mismatches more than you ever would, in Brian Ferentz's offense where you weren't even running motion, right? Lester is the sort of guy that appreciates that chess that can actually generate all those mismatches you want to see. Eliot, your brain's burning here.
Yeah, I got something to say. You mentioned the track speed. First of all, 10.67 in the 100-meter dash. That's really fast. That's really, really fast. He would have won state titles and I think 3 out of the 4 classes in 2023. He's had some injury history, so he's got this non-contact thing going on in his knee. We don't know what it is to be exact, but he's had an injury history, missing games in football, missing time in track. So that's something that's notable. And I imagine it's that big lanky frame, and he just needs to put weight on it, right, to prevent some of those injuries. First of all, second of all, you mentioned him being more of an X guy. That's what I would guess as well. Add him to the list of Reese Vanderzee, Dayton Howard, kind of Jarriett Bowie, but that, and I think the number one thing that is maybe a surprise here is the fact that it happened so quickly that makes me just go, ooh, he must have really been struggling. you know, Freshman quarterback, not Lester's guy, and you knew about this athleticism coming in. We saw him throw a pass in Kids Day, and it was a total duck. Other than that, he threw, and I think KJ Parker caught it, freshman wide receiver, and other than that, he was just taking off and running. Those were his successes in Kids Day, and so that's again, I would have figured they'd give him a year, maybe at least get him to spring ball before they made the change. But just in a situation where what this does in a positive light is obviously Cade graduates. You still got Brendan Sullivan. You still got Marco Linez back. Presumably still got Jackson Stratton back. Then you're bringing in Jimmy Sullivan in your 2025 class, which though he wasn't a Lester guy, Lester, we've talked about this before. That picture when he first went out to watch him throw, Lester looked like a fat kid in a candy store. Like it was a major positive. Now, what that does, in addition to moving Resar to receiver, is it allows another year of flexibility for the portal. And when you've got several guys in your room that aren't your guys, you can go out and get another one of your guys, another one of guys that maybe you recruited at Western Michigan or whatever Lester did, like what he did with Brendan Sullivan, going out and get him. So it offers him some flexibility to add some depth to the room if he doesn't think that Marco can get there going into next year or the year after. And it gives some cushion between Sullivan and Cash Herrera, who are his guys too. So I think we can move on because we know we got to get Ross out of here. Let's move on to our 3 keys for this game against Wisconsin, who has won 3 out of their last 4. Ross, we'll start with you here because we know you got to get going.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. My key is just the trenches. I think whoever is more successful on the offensive and defensive line is going to win this game, and it's going to come down to the running game. Both these teams want to run the ball, and when these teams are successful running the ball, they tend to win games. When they're not successful running the ball, they struggle. When they're not successful stopping the opponent from running the ball, they are not successful. Wisconsin is 5-0 this year when they run for at least 150 yards, 0-3 when they don't. So that's big. Iowa, they got gashed by Ohio State. Not a shocker. They got gashed by Michigan State. Kind of a shocker. But the defense as a whole was very poor that day, as they would be the first to tell you. I know. So I think, it's if the defense can slow down the run for Wisconsin, and if the offensive line can, establish a good running game for Iowa, and Sullivan's going to help with that too, with his, running ability. That's going to make the difference in the game from my perspective. Like who is better able, especially, they're talking about rain in the forecast. That could be not great for passing potentially. So yeah, to me, this game is about the run. It's about the trench battles and who wins those.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, my key is excuse me, my key is clearing my throat. No, my key is pretty similar to Ross in that what's really going to come down to it is, does Sullivan put enough pressure on Wisconsin safeties that they have to stay high, that they can't just key on Caleb Johnson? Because we've seen, especially in the last few weeks, that especially when Cade McNamara was in the game, teams could key on Caleb Johnson, basically stop him at the line, before he can get his, track speed, that elite athleticism really going. And it turned into a real boom or bust situation with him. Sullivan being on the field really helped open that back up for Johnson against Northwestern. But Wisconsin is a team that actually knows how to play a little bit of defense on both sides of the ball. Their rush defense is a little bit porous. They're the fifth worst team in the Big Ten, which you wouldn't really expect in Madison. But some of that has to do with the fact that they've played, the likes of Alabama, USC, Penn State. Those are ranked teams. Those are tough games. And they've turned into a real like Jekyll and Hyde on defense, where in their 3 losses, they've allowed an average of 36 points per game. And in their 5 wins, it's like 8 points per game, right? So what it really comes down to is, can you get that Wisconsin defense out of its comfort zone? Can you sustain drives when Caleb Johnson is your, bell cow, and everybody, all 22 guys on the field know it? It was a lot easier when it was against Troy, against Illinois State, and, to some extent, against even Iowa State in that first half. Now that everybody knows the key, does Brendan Sullivan change that math when it's a solid defense? Can he keep the Badgers from just bombing the line of scrimmage on basically every play that's not a 3rd and 10? That's what I'm going to be looking for. Eliot, how about you?
Well, Tyler Van Dyke's been out for a little while, starting quarterback for Wisconsin. And in lieu of his injury, it's been Braden Locke back there for the Badgers, coming from Rockwall, Texas, redshirt sophomore. And well, he hasn't been good. 102 of 107, or excuse me, 102 of 177 through the air, which is 57.6 percentage for completions, 1,281 yards, 7 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And for as much as I've been able to watch Wisconsin this year, which isn't a lot, I'll say that I saw him straight up give up the ball when they were playing against Northwestern, threw it, and I'm not kidding, directly to a Northwestern defender. So if Iowa can continue to force those turnovers and match the touchdowns for interceptions, that's going to be really important. That's going to be really a confidence booster for the secondary, who got thrashed against Michigan State, bounced back this week, like you wrote about, Adam, and is looking to continue to push forward. It looks like you both have something to say.
The one little thing that I'll add to, probably going to be a rainy night at Kinnick Stadium. So how does that affect, the field conditions? And how does it affect how much these teams want to throw the ball, run the ball, etc.? That's also what I'm looking for. Ross, how about you?
I was just going to piggyback on Elliot's point about Locke. His season stats this year are very similar to Cade McNamara's at Iowa. That's not probably the neighborhood you want to be in as a quarterback this season. So,
ouch, that really stings.
Yeah.
Ross, give us your score prediction for this weekend.
Yeah, well, Adam's stat about the points per game Wisconsin has allowed had me thinking. It's like, boy, can Iowa score, 30 plus points against Wisconsin? Like, is that kind of what it takes to win it? And it's like, Well, I don't think so. I think that's just the way those games worked out. Because I'm not expecting Iowa to score 30 plus on Wisconsin. If they do, that is a great night at Kinnick Stadium on Saturday. There'll be a lot of happy Iowa fans. So I'm going with 23-17 Iowa. I think it's going to be a much lower scoring, closer game. These teams look very evenly matched to me. Very similar styles, which again is nothing remotely new for the last, since Barry Alvarez went to Wisconsin. They've had very similar identities. That's changed a little bit with Fickle and the air raid, but this still looks a lot like, a more classic Wisconsin team in a lot of ways. A lot of running the ball. They're going to try to stop you on, up front on defense. So, who can do what they want to do better? And Iowa's at home. They're coming off a really nice win. They didn't get a carryover effect from that Washington win against Michigan State, but, that was on the road. Maybe that was the difference. I think there's going to be a little more carryover this time. And Caleb's going to win that running battle between Iowa and Wisconsin. So 23-17 Hawkeyes.
Ross, get the hell out of here. Get going.
All right. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, buddy.
See you, Ross.
Should have mentioned spread is 3, opened at 3.5. Now Iowa's favored by 3. Over under is started at 42.5. Now it's at 40.5. So go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I think that's the rain playing tricks on the spread as much as anything. I think this is going to be a low scoring game, not only because of the rain, but because Iowa's basically on a quarterback who's going to be making his first start for the Hawkeyes. Wisconsin, as you mentioned, is going to be on their backup QB. And these defenses are pretty well tuned to sort of cancel out each other's biggest strengths. So I do think that Iowa's ability to get that power rushing game going, especially over the course of 60 minutes, and especially with somebody like Sullivan giving the linebackers one extra dimension to account for, I think that pushes Iowa into probably the favorite role for me. So I'm going to say something pretty similar to Ross, but even lower scoring. So I'm going to say 17-13 Iowa. I think this is going to be a tough knockdown drag out game. But when Iowa and Wisconsin plays, when Iowa and Wisconsin play, it seems like the team that wins is always the team that is getting downhill more often. And when I look at Wisconsin's attack and Iowa's attack, I think this year, because usually it's Wisconsin, but I think this year Iowa can be that team that gets downhill a little bit more often. So 17-13 Hawkeyes for me. Eliot, how about you?
I'm of the same mind, and mostly because of Caleb Johnson. Additionally, just how much Brendan Sullivan opens things up. And I think the fact that it is raining will probably, I don't know if it'll favor Iowa just because of how much they're focused on the run game, because Wisconsin is as well. But I think the rain will help Iowa in this circumstance. And for that reason, I'm dropping myself right in the middle between you and Ross and saying Iowa wins 20-17 in this one. Would not surprise me if that's how it shakes out. Probably going to be some turnovers, probably going to be coughing up the ball. Going to be a lot of runs, running the ball this weekend. So you folks who are run the damn ball will enjoy this game. So once again, folks, appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast. We're going to wrap it up here. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today. Join us at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. We're going to have intel, including visitors, recruiting, football, basketball, as we continue forward. Women's basketball tonight, so follow along with Adam and his writing on Twitter, as well as on the site at iowa.rivals.com. Hit that subscribe button there on YouTube. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what your score predictions are for Iowa versus Wisconsin. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review and hit subscribe, because you might be listening but not subscribed. So do that so you don't miss an episode. And once again, folks, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder. For now, we will see you next time.